Welcome everyone to our third episode with Robbie Shilstone, and he's another animator in NFT space. And let's hear, Robbie, how did you end up here in this space? I know you were an illustrator before you became an animator. So what was your journey through animation? How did you end up here?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Really appreciate being able to talk about my work. Yeah, so I went to school for illustration, as you kind of said, and I always knew I wanted to animate, and it was kind of a matter of figuring out the best path forward. Particularly, I knew I wanted to be a 2D animator and a hand-drawn animator. So the logic there was kind of if I can learn to draw it once, I can learn to draw it hundreds of times. And so I actually, after college, picked up the Animators Survival Kit by Richard Williams and just taught myself. I think it's pretty clear, like the fundamentals are there, and there's just a matter of experimentation to kind of land on, how to use this medium to express ideas and give characters performances and so on. So, yeah, it's been, really fun process, obviously. From there, kind of went into doing freelance work, worked with Apple and Disney, the MoMA. It's kind of, I'm going through a lot of years of work and, experimentation and whatnot. But yeah, just picked up kind of a career freelancing and built a pretty large audience online, which led to a
Mhm.
lot of those opportunities. So,
Mm.
um, kind of always knew that I wanted to be doing my own thing, and I'm pretty adamant on being an independent animator. So it was always a matter of time of figuring out where I would find a chance to tell my own stories and make my own films. And so come 2021, when the world kind of shut down for a little bit, and I, kind of was turned on to NFTs and Web3 through some pretty notable sales in the space. I started to kind of look into it a little bit more. Spent that entire year more or less observing and learning kind of what this space was like. Prior to that, had never touched crypto, had never touched anything like that. So there was a lot of learning happening in a very short amount of time. Through that process, while we were observing, we actually got contacted by Method Man, who's a Wu-Tang Clan member, the hip hop group, who's a pretty big deal in the hip hop world and rap, and want to do a one-of-one collaboration together. This is kind of at the peak of all of the mania around it. And I was like, absolutely, let's just try it out. We're already interested in doing it. So kind of got fast tracked into this world.
Mhm.
Uh, had a
So
sale
how
that
was he utilizing the NFT space? What did he need you?
So he is a musical artist, right? So he had like music didn't really have as much traction in the space. It was people were trying to wrap their heads around, okay, how does music fit into this world? And at the time, it was kind of meant to be, it was seen more as like not a full product in its own right that people were collecting. And so for me, it was, I essentially did it was an audiovisual collaboration. So
Hmm.
I did a looped animation to an unreleased song of his, and
Cool.
put it up online, sold for $20,000. And we were like, okay, I think we'll hang out and see what's going on over here. So yeah, it was pretty cool. So that's kind of how I got into this space. And then that was at the end of 2021. And then come January 1st, 2022, I was like, I want to make films using this. I want to fund my film
Mm.
through this process. And so that from that point on, it's been a journey of figuring that out and experimenting and doing it. And we've had some pretty good success doing it. So yeah,
Yeah, I want to deep dive into that. But before that,
yeah.
when you were working for MoMA and Disney, how did you land those clients? Were you working in some studios before, or were you just straight to Disney's doors? Hello, here I am.
Disney came to me, which was great. Uh,
How come?
so I have a pretty large following online,
Mm.
and
Yes.
during the past few years have had many pieces that have gone viral, and that's a really good marketing tool.
How long did it take you to build that following?
So I I got a smartphone. I got an iPhone after college, which I'm actually very thankful that I waited so long because I didn't have really a lot of outside influences when I was in school and just really focused on who I was. So come 2016 is when I pretty much, or 2017 is when I got online and on Instagram, shared a bunch of work, experimented, did a lot of client work, some music videos, things like that that didn't really, they were just work at the time, really. Um, and then eventually I landed on my style that I've kind of become known for. And I knew it was really good. And I knew like I was endlessly excited by it. So it didn't really take off until like this one piece in particular in 2020, I think. Um, the the mix of character animation, jazz music, and storytelling all kind of like blended into a single piece, and it took off on TikTok and Instagram, which kind of led us to uh, experimenting within that model a little bit. Um, and yeah, from essentially 2021 to now have built, over 600,000 followers, pretty steadily. Um, the algorithm more recently has become pretty bizarre, and they've started to prioritize, viral content over who you actually follow.
Yes.
So it's an interesting dynamic from my perspective of trying to consider how much do I want to bend over backwards to accommodate an algorithm
Mm.
versus just making work that I'm excited about towards an actual goal and a mission that I have, which is to make films.
Mhm.
So at some point, you have to just prioritize what it is that you actually want to do, and kind of
Mhm.
bleeds into why I'm treading into Web3 to begin with.
Yeah, so once you got that first viral video, have you learned what are the commonalities of virality in general? Have you managed to reproduce virality in your next videos, or was it like by chance every time? So what was your experience with it?
Yeah, we've definitely like kind of started to notice a bit of a formula that we knew would do well. I don't know, going into it, you're not trying to make things being like, oh, this is going to do really well.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you go into it with that, it kind of not only ruins the point of like
Mm-hmm.
the creative process of just
Mm-hmm.
exploring and experimenting, um, but you tended to have an idea. You're like, all right, I know this character will appeal because I know that kind of content has done
Mm.
well before. I never tried to pursue that wholeheartedly. It wasn't really the entire idea. Um, but when my interests went over there, I was like, okay, like particularly musicians, like a character playing music, uh, almost guaranteed to do well. Because people love musicality, they love seeing the characters performing it, and there's I think there's a large portion of my audience that loves jazz music and loves seeing it incorporated. So
Mhm.
I know that that was kind of a through line that would do well. But yeah, never chased, just kind of did my own thing, and it soon enough just it worked out.
Yeah, I mean, your style is pretty recognizable. Uh, I mean, I can see how people can copy it, but I don't see them creating again something unique like you
Right?
created. So
Yeah,
yeah,
I think there's a great Ernest Hemingway quote. He's like, "I'd write you a short story if I had the time," which essentially says it's hard to be concise. It's hard to
yes,
be, minimal.
yes,
And
yes.
even in the AI world, I was
Mhm.
talking about this with someone yesterday. I'm like, I actually think AI has a hard time reducing things. It's great
Mm,
at complexity. It's really bad at reduction.
mm,
And I actually find, not that I'm, entirely resilient to the new technologies that are coming, but I like to think that there's something innately human to simplifying and abstracting. So, um,
um,
yeah,
so you basically built a brand for yourself and you attracted big names and they wanted to work with you.
yep,
That's
yeah, exactly. So they saw my pieces go viral. For Disney example, the show I worked on was called Rise Up, Sing Out. It was a kind of Black youth empowerment music video anthology. And all the music was done by The Roots, who's a pretty popular group here in the States. Um, and yeah, it was like a really great opportunity. And I did essentially all of the VFX for the whole thing, a lot of jazzy, embellishments and things like that across the music videos. So, um, So obviously they kind of found a project that really fit me.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
the MoMA, for example, was a, a modernist art exhibit for this female modernist named Sophie Teuber Arp, who during World War II was a very active artist, but she never really got the recognition at that time because it's a very male-dominated space. So I found myself, more or less adding my animations um, to her exhibit, which
Mhm.
was great. I grew up going to the MoMA. Like it was for me, that was like super exciting to contribute to that whole space
Mhm.
and whatnot.
Cool. So 2021, you got the first taste of NFT and how does it feel like the whole protocol experience, however you want to call it. You got the sense of it, and then you get the idea like there's something to it. And so what's next? Like how did your concept is pretty different from what Nick and Clinosaurus are doing. Like they have tons of assets, but you have one asset. How did you come to the idea to auction your characters for your movie?
Yeah. So to provide a little context to listeners, we auction off characters every single week. Collecting a character makes you a producer of my project called Publique. And we're making short films and inviting the producers into that process. They can develop ideas for their characters, and it's a collaborative storytelling experience. Um, I think for me, there was a handful of things that uh, pointed me in this direction. One of which is the idea of like scarcity and saying that, I think that I always find myself kind of wanting to drift more into the fine art world stylistically, as well as, in terms of how I envision this project. I envision it like gallery, in a gallery space with the characters and the music playing for each character. Um, so there's that. But also, I think when I think about characters in particular, like, and the ones that you love the most are not like a generative collection. They're not like a background character or one of
Mm,
6,000 different T-Rexes in the Clinosaurus instance. Your favorite characters are one of ones. They're unique individuals. And that's why you love them, because they are personal, because they have their quirks and their imperfections and they're human. And so for me, it always felt clear that if I'm going to have characters as assets to collect and fundraise through, that they should be characters that could actually show up in films that have uniqueness to them.
mm,
And and that's just what life is. We're all, unique in our own way. So it felt really obvious to me in that way. It might not be the most financially advantageous thing to do because there's a lot of, people like to have the big collections that you can collect and then try and make money off of. And I understand that there's different models to that. But for me, I'm not thinking about just a moment. I'm thinking about long term. I'm thinking about the films that I want to make and the characters that are in it, should be as rich as, as people are in life. So that was kind of, that was always my mindset with it.
mm. Yeah, looking through how you guys set up the Publique project, it looks a lot like uh, general crowdfunding, like Kickstarter crowdfunding. You give your donors or your supporters some perks when they buy a piece of your project, basically. So, uh, when you buy a character, like you said, you become a producer, and on your website, I could see that when you become a producer, you get a say in the story as well. So how do you then create, how do you like keep the creative aspect of the story of yourself if you have too many cooks in the kitchen?
For sure. And it's not a pain point, but it's something that I could envision becoming a problem if people start to feel too outspoken. I think from my experience so far, so we've already fundraised one film through this means. It's called Off Leash. It's a short film about a bunch of dogs, and we auctioned off 9 dogs, and we said whichever one sells for the most becomes the protagonist of the film. And again, there's this improvisational storytelling element to it. And I was curious to see really to what degree people felt inclined to get involved, and we let everyone name the dogs and have behind the scenes look at the process of here are the storyboards and here's the animatic and just building this thing up together. And I think that there's a lot of fun to be had with just seeing this thing come to life step by step. Um, all of them were very much so in the camp of like, we want to see what you make. We're not here to get in the
Mm,
way.
okay.
And I know that's not going to be the case for all projects.
Yeah.
But I think that my work and hopefully my career shows that I'm on the
I
right track.
trust you.
Yeah, there's a lot of trust in this,
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean there isn't room for interpretation or interjecting.
Yeah.
For instance, I'm working on another little reel for Instagram using one of the characters for Public that's already been auctioned. And it's based on an idea that the producer who collected it had. He's like, it's a little girl who has like a little flute case, and she will inevitably be a flute player.
Mm,
Um, and he's like, I'd love it if she was like a little Pied Piper and like a bunch of rats like gathered around her while she was playing. And I was like,
mm,
great. Like that's something that will take me, a day or two to make. It's not going to impact like a film, but you could totally see a little short, 1, 2
yeah.
minute little film about her being scared to play in front of people, and so she like tucks away in the school somewhere,
Mm,
and then she all of a sudden has an audience of rats that love her music, and you're like
yeah.
we can consolidate that into a single reel, but you could always expand upon it into a greater story.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, it's a perfect segue into rats. I haven't seen before what you guys have done with rats and pigeons.
yeah,
So once you first enter into public ecosystem, you get two free digital assets, pigeon or a rat. So why did you decide to give them freely? Like what do they represent
yeah.
for
So
collectors?
yeah, I think there's a stigma in the space right now that it's entirely financially motivated. And I think that is not the right way to think about this new technology. In my opinion, this is a means of like owning your fan even more so. So, for instance, if Instagram shut down tomorrow, I
Mm,
will lose $450,000, you know? And there's no real way for me to hold on to that fan in a way outside of the platform. So Solana and building on chain, what the advantage is here is that if a website shuts down, if the public site no longer exists, I still have a direct connection to that fan, because they have an asset that's part of my project.
mm,
And in my mind, this was a means of inviting people into this world with as little friction as possible. People who
mhm.
don't know about crypto, people who don't
Yes.
have a wallet, any of that, just an email, and you can sign up and you can collect something. And I
Mm,
think for
mm,
me, if I believe in the long-term vision of this space, then I need to have that accessible way to get into this.
mm,
Every fan shouldn't be paying to be a fan. That
mm.
I have a lot of fans who don't pay right now. Why should I set that expectation for this next place as well?
Yeah.
So it's an entry point. And we can do fun things with that. So for instance, every auction of every week, we encourage people to write stories, which is something that a lot of people do on Instagram already for every character. And the top liked story on the website during each auction gets rewarded a piece of trash, which is a collectible. And we give that to a rat or a pigeon, depending on who it is. And it's wild, but those pieces of trash have sold for sometimes $1,500.
Okay, explain to people when you say it gets rewarded with piece of trash, explain what trash is.
Well, trash is just as a rat or a pigeon, it's what you love more than anything, right? It's the thing that they are competing over.
Hmm.
So the kind of launch cinematic, they're fighting over an apple, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
And and I want that narrative of this endless feud between these two factions to play
Hmm.
out across the whole project. So
Mm.
they show up in films, they're fighting over it. They show up in vignettes, and how can we incorporate that into the rollout of these characters as well?
Mm.
So not only through the storytelling function, but also through bidding. So we're keeping track of which side is winning each auction. You can see just on the bidding panel, essentially, if a rat or a
Hmm.
pigeon wins the character.
Hmm.
And whichever side wins is getting also rewarded a little something each week. So again, gamifying that process a little bit, inviting fans in. Uh, you might not win a character, but maybe you build up this
Hmm.
hoard of trash
Hmm.
that you can you could either sell it or eventually you'll be able to consume it as a means of adding more rats and pigeon to your collection. So
Mm.
kind of like a fun fan thing there, you know?
Okay, so my brain already hurts, so I have to repeat it in order to see if I understood it. So you can sign freely with just an email to get a
Yep.
pigeon or a rat. And
Yep.
then with that pigeon or a rat, you can open a wallet, right?
Yeah. I mean, we make a wallet for you,
You
right?
guys make a wallet. Okay. Which
Yep.
one?
There's a protocol called Underdog
Underdog.
that we
Okay.
use. Again, the whole point of it is to make something that people don't really
Hmm.
feel. Like if
Right.
I think a lot of projects in this space suffer from the idea that they make crypto their brand. And I think that's a really dangerous place to start a project because there's a lot of people who do not like crypto, right? Or who have negative sentiment towards it.
Mhm.
So if you use it as a tool to create cool experiences
Mhm.
for people,
Right.
then then now you don't need to explain why they should care.
Mm.
It just enables it.
Right. So once you guys open the wallet for a new collector, it's almost like a login to your world, to your ecosystem, to your website, to your blockchain platform. So a user doesn't have to do anything except use email.
Yep, exactly.
Awesome.
So
Awesome.
you
And
can
then with pigeon on or rat, you can you can trade with trash, right? Or you can buy a character.
you can think of it as two separate things, right?
Okay.
The rat and pigeon is just your login to the world.
Okay.
If you want to become if you're a super fan, if you're a crypto native and you want to start and you want to collect a character, then you need a Web3 wallet. You need
Mm-hmm.
Solana.
Mm-hmm.
You need
Uh-huh.
currency to start bidding on auctions. But for me, it's an entry point at the very least. And
Okay.
it invites my existing Web2 audience into this
Mm-hmm.
world without needing to explain anything under the hood. And I
Oh,
think that
is that why you guys made a website, like a separate platform from? Got it. Okay.
Yep. Because if I send a fan of mine to a website that has other artworks or platforms, they're going to see the kinds of projects there that, frankly, I think are not great, you know, and we want to really a real curated experience that feels immersive, that you can
Mm-hmm.
have your entire public experience on this one website.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been an interesting learning curve in its own right of figuring out how to, people are less inclined to go off of their favorite platforms. And, it could be hard to manage, getting people onto a site.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that we have weekly auctions and there's, a real purpose there, that kind of gives a chance for people to head on over and experience it.
Got it. So it's like a funnel where you bring them onto your website, get to introduce the character and the story, and then if they buy in, then they're motivated enough to register a real wallet and
Yep.
buy auction a character.
Yep. Exactly. It's kind
Awesome.
of, and I don't think every fan, kind of what I said before, I don't think every fan should feel like they need to be buying into a project, right?
Mm,
Like let fans be fans at their comfort level. And I don't need you to spend $1,000 to be part of this project if you just want to tell a story every week.
mm,
That should be free. That should be something that this is meant to be a collaborative, creative space for people.
mm.
And if we exclude people from that, that to me feels like a foolish thing to do.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I really love. So Leash was your Off Leash was your first project, right? And this is like a second one. So I'm curious. I saw somewhere that you guys collected like $12,000 for a leash, for off
Yeah.
leash. I'm curious, like how satisfied were you with that? Was that enough? What was your goal? So yeah, what was the whole experience?
Yeah. So for me, being an animator, I have control over the production costs in a way. So it's a great thing to be the one that's in charge of actually making the things that you're doing, because, it's just your time that you're really, contributing to this. So it was that project in particular was really a proof of concept. And
Mm,
it was our plan B more than anything. We had an idea to do an entirely separate film. Uh, and the market essentially didn't allow it. There was a big kind of crash in the
Mm-hmm.
value of these tokens, and
Mm-hmm.
it made it so that we had to essentially scale back our plans to be more accommodating to how much we think we could have raised.
Mm-hmm.
So at that time, we more or less were like, okay, let's make a simpler film with simpler characters,
Mm-hmm.
and so that is kind of what led to that project, being what it was. I thought $12,000 was great. At the time, it's not as far as like paychecks for clients and stuff like that, it's not huge. But it was enough to allow me to dedicate, a
Mm-hmm.
couple of months to create it. And, without the worry of like, oh, I really should be doing something else. I should really be working on client work or whatever. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
no,
Yeah.
you could actually, you paid yourself. And so now
Yeah.
it's time just to get to work. Um, Obviously more money is great. And, I think people can get obsessed with the prices of how much people raise and whatnot. But again, if I'm trying to remain independent, I think that it, to me, has a really great pocket to
Mm-hmm.
fundraise for my own needs.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's the real expenses for me come from just like hiring composers to work with and, getting, their expertise on this project. So, um, outside of that, the costs are just my time, which again is not, I don't, I'm not strapped for like, oh, this needs to make this much or else I can't do it. It's like, let's see how much we can raise. That kind of dictates how much time I can dedicate to it. And yeah, compared to say doing it on Instagram or something like that, there's pretty much zero monetization model through Instagram. You know, the ones that do exist are quite nominal from my experience and
Mm-hmm.
have hurt my own natural reach more than they have actually benefited me.
Mm,
So
okay. Have you experimented with Instagram subscription model?
I'm less inclined to do that for a number of reasons. Um, for one, I think there's an expectation for things to be free there. Um, a lot of people are, I think very comfortable with just their experience through it. And even now, more so from my personal experience, um, getting people that are, getting in front of people's eyes to me is more valuable than trying to monetize every fan. And so I find that to be a little bit of a difficult place to monetize. Um, and yeah, like there's other models to your point, like Patreon or Kickstarter and other places that people crowdfund.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think those places have the same issues of centralized places and marketplaces where people, are not they're not getting something in return that this is perceived more as an investment rather than just a subscription that you're not really
Right.
seeing, which leads to larger sales numbers and allows you to actually move more quickly and scale larger. So yeah, that's kind of like my own experience with it though.
Right. I heard a lot of artists and creators kind of backing away from Kickstarters and Patreon because you have to give away a lot and you're kind of turning into a small business almost, while with blockchain, you're kind of keeping more of that creating freedom and you're allowing sneak peeks, kind of what like Claynosaurus is doing, sharing the artwork, sharing the work in progress. And I think people love that, love the struggle, and allowing people to participate in the story. That's brilliant.
Yeah, I think there's you could do this any number of ways, right? This is just a new tool, and I think
Yeah.
what people have to come to the table with is, "Well, how am I doing it differently,
Hmm.
and what value propositions here that doesn't exist elsewhere as just a passive fan. And for me, it's like, yeah, let's invite people into that process. I think the amount of time that's spent making something is as valuable as far as entertainment goes and participation goes as just watching it. And so it feels like you're missing out on a lot of opportunity by just disappearing for a while, making a film, and then coming back.
Hmm.
You want there to be an excited fan base waiting for that film so that when it comes out, they're going to scream about it from the rooftops and they're going to share it with their friends because they were along for the whole ride.
Mm, yeah, yeah. But you had to make some investment into the whole thing. Like, did you have to hire developers to build that whole website and platform for Publique?
I did. Yeah. I was, I think a really great part about the space is that there is a lot of people that want to see cool things being built here. And there's a lot of money to be through grants and things like that, that are pretty abundant. And so if you're good and you're coming to the table with a really great idea, I think people are eager to support it. So we were able to get a couple of grants from the Solana Foundation and
Awesome.
and through
Awesome. Awesome.
Metaplex that allowed us to develop this whole project out. So I haven't invested a single dollar of my own money into this. Um, and I think that not only that, but there's a kind of a cultural thing that feels like it exists in this space that is very much so communally built. And so we've worked with so many different developers who are building out their own tools and their own features, and they just want to see those tools being implemented. And there's like the amount of like not free software, but like people who are, wanting to help the project has been overwhelming, and it's really cool because I think there's the difference of between owning the things that you make that are being built online versus on someone else's servers or someone else's pages. There's a longevity to it that I think a lot of developers are seeing here. And it's creating this really collaborative environment for building these projects. And it's exciting. And it kind of like restores a little bit of faith in humanity. It feels very much like early internet days where people are just making things because they want to, because they have
Yeah.
time and they want to contribute in their own way. And we end up being a playground for people to experiment through. And that's really exciting for us.
Yeah, I understand how this is beneficial for creators, but it's hard for me to understand what's in it for the buyer, not the fan. I understand why fans support it, but the
Sure.
buyer, like the trader, and I can get why people are buying cute dinos and trading them because they're worth a lot. But what is the value for a trader, for someone who is looking like a financial benefit from it to auction a character and then do what with you only have one character. So
Sure.
it's only you have to build such a strong brand in Web 2 in order for the value of that character to grow up. And then you trade it exactly for what? Uh,
Yeah, I mean, we're playing on speculative markets here, right?
yeah.
And I think compared to say the Klanosaurus project, who has what over 10,000, dinosaurs that you can buy as many as you want at once, and you can try and make a quick dollar with them and trade them because there's a fixed
Hmm.
amount, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And I think we approach it a little bit differently in the sense that this isn't a quick buck. We actually don't want to encourage that kind of trading because we
yeah.
want
Hmm.
long-term people
Hmm.
who see a vision here. So I can already tell you, like the people who've already collected, we're on our 12th character who's live right now, actually. Um, but even in the first 11 collectors, we have Hollywood writers, we have engineers, we have comic creators.
Hmm.
We're building it's a little bit different of a project in terms of this online network
Yes, yes,
that
yes.
occurs, and being part of this at some point I like to think, will be not only like a status symbol kind of thing, like owning a Picasso is a status symbol. I'm not going to go out and say that that's who I am, but that analogy of saying, okay, you own a part of Public, that means something in the world of entertainment.
Mm.
Um, I think that longer term vision of that, as well as also this network effect of this is a new way of like breaking down barriers into the entertainment industry. So,
Oh, I
you
see.
know, collect a character. Who else is in here? Some pretty notable people. Some people at the Solana Foundation, some people who are, you know, uh, previous executives in marketing agencies. And, we have this pretty already great network of people. And it's exciting to see who comes in every single week. And we're like, oh, this is
Yeah.
becoming pretty powerful. And there's like a lot of talent in this group. So when we come up with problems or start ideating on our next steps, people are like, oh, I know exactly who we should talk to because I'm an expert in that field. Or, it becomes pretty cool. Outside of that as well, this is something that's not being advertised outwardly, um, because I don't want to necessarily make the wrong incentives here. But a lot of these characters have already shown up in commercials for major brands. So the character that's live right now, she was featured in a DoorDash campaign on Instagram. It's been seen by hundreds of thousands of people and made a nice check, making that ad. And the idea would be if you, as a collector of that character, would get residuals from commercial opportunities that your character is featured in. So hypothetically, a 5%, project fee goes to the collector as a means of saying, thank you for supporting our project. Your character, was in a Starbucks commercial or whatever. And these projects aren't, they're not nothing. They can be, anywhere from 20 to $80,000 projects. And if you're talking about 5% from that, all of a sudden now you've already returned your investment and you have your character still. So I think monetizing these assets outside of flipping them is my goal. It's what encourages that long-term holding behavior. And it's what also
Mm.
just, I think, there's brand, opportunities that are really valuable for the project. And there's just another revenue stream for what we do. Because I can't imagine, I'm not going to be foolish and say that character auctions are the only way that this project's making money. That it's a very volatile market. Our first character sold for $14,000. Our most recent one sold for $600. You know, the like
Yeah.
it's I can't be confident in saying this is exact the only place that we're making money.
Yeah.
So we have other ideas as far as where that kind of financialization will come from. But um, yeah, those are some ideas as far as how we're doing it a little bit differently, and I think it's pretty compelling.
It's amazing. It's really amazing. So you guys are kind of like a young Facebook, and people who buy your characters are early investors who would buy a stock of Facebook or Nvidia. So it's
Yep.
kind of like that. Yeah,
And
it's
it's ha they happen to have a face and a musical theme to that stock is kind of a
yeah,
way to
yeah,
think about it.
yeah,
So
yeah. Yeah, it's pretty revolutionary actually when you think about it. Imagine you own the rights to Marge Simpson.
yeah, I was gonna say, imagine you own Mickey Mouse,
Yeah,
right? There's only
yeah,
one of them, right? Or SpongeBob or whatever animated character, it can be hard to put a value on how, like the emotional value to these characters, right? Because as a kid, you're like, oh, this meant everything to me, it was my favorite show or whatever. And so I find that to be, another angle to this that's kind of compelling. You don't want to sell it because you become emotionally
yes.
attached to it.
Yes, yes. So yeah, the auctions are every week. Every
Yeah.
week you're pushing out a new character. So how are you making time for all of this? Like, is this your full-time job now, or do you do this on the side?
Yeah. I've been doing this pretty pretty heavy-handedly for the past 3 years or so, building this thing
Mm,
up, making
okay.
films. Um, and so for me, I do take on commercial work when necessary. I've become a little bit more particular about who I work with because I'm now measuring it to
Mm-hmm.
like working on my own projects.
Yeah.
Um, but as it stands right now, the characters are all done. Or I should say the first 2 years of characters are done. So we have
How
like
many
104
characters do you have?
ready, 104. Um,
Okay.
I could see that depending on where the markets go,
Mm-hmm.
depending on just I can't plan
Mm-hmm.
that far out in advance, but I'd
Mm-hmm.
like to think that this could easily go to 1,000 characters in
Mm-hmm.
terms of just the amount of them and the variety of characters.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when, oh, God.
And what is the story? What's the story gonna be?
Yeah, so every single film is going to follow a different protagonist in the
Mm-hmm.
collection.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of radically empathetic to every single one, like what the world look like through their eyes. Um, and over time, we want it to, they're all going to be short films, anywhere
Mm-hmm.
from like 4 to 8 minutes or so. Um, so I'm not, trying to make a feature film here. I think I have ideas for the kinds of films I want to make. And if I can build a short film anthology that has, 8 to 10 films, great. And that is a product that I could take to a Netflix or an
Yes.
HBO, and I could license that out to them. And I own those films because we fundraise them ourselves. And in my opinion, that's kind of how you get ahead in this industry is you own the things you make. So, um, that's the long-term vision. The first film we're making right now is a character who has not been auctioned off yet. And we want to be, I think, because we're getting this thing off the ground right now, we want to be very particular about making sure everyone feels like that this is a fair process. And if there's this film in particular, I'm not going to share many details on the film here, but it's a film that has repetition built into it. And every single time you revisit these scenes, each time it's a chance for a character to be, shown in the background as, a habitant in this city, as a citizen, really. So there's all these little pockets within the film that give these collectors a chance to be like, what are they doing back there?
Mm,
Where are they going? What's their day
yeah,
looking like?
yeah.
And I find that to be, really exciting as from a collector's perspective, but also for me, I I'm not as precious about the background character in a film as much as I am the protagonist. And so if I have control over that first character, great.
Mm.
Let's play and be collaborative in that way. And there's that opportunity.
Yeah, I see how rewarding that is for the fans to some art, not some, but amazing artists tell their story. It's so
Yep.
rewarding to see that. So I can see why someone would buy it and hold it. Um, all right, so we have 15 more minutes. I want to ask you, I saw on your Instagram that your grandfather was also a great artist. So I'm curious how much of his style have you picked up and how did you develop your style? And how I saw it didn't took you too long to develop your style. I saw you pretty soon out of college. You were onto it. So tell us a little bit
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah. So my grandfather, his name is Arthur Shilstone. It's my middle name is Arthur. He was like my biggest influence growing up. Like genuinely, like some of my first memories were sitting on his lap in his studio, uh, watching characters being drawn from the tip of his pencil. And there's this really just I have such a strong bond with him and always knew that like drawing was something that I wanted to pursue in my life. It was never just a hobby. It was always positioned to me as a career. And so I always took it very seriously. He it was predominantly a watercolor artist, had worked in New York City during like the magazine eras. So he worked for Life magazine, for National Geographic, he was on site at the first NASA launch, as the de facto artist for NASA. He's a historic man in a lot of ways. And so I was always introduced to this really passionate, lifelong career. He was painting until his last days when he was 98 years old, you know. And so I find myself, really building on his legacy in a lot of ways. He was not an animator, but he was very much so uh, very talented artist. And so for me, when I graduated college in 2016, obviously immediate thing I wanted to do was try and find work. And I did some freelance work and I ended up moving out to California for a tech startup job that was doing essentially like After Effects motion graphics work for Whole Foods, for Pepsi, Coke, all this very corporate, very commercial work. Um, After a year, got let go from there. And it was a year there that I pretty much dedicated entirely to experimentation. And that corporate job for 2 years allowed me to the time to really
Mhm.
just put all my energy towards. I was living in a place that I didn't really want to be in. Didn't have like I was living with my girlfriend, but didn't really have a lot of friends outside of that because the area wasn't really our cultural pocket, let's say. So it kind of, I just found myself, dedicating all my time to really finding out who I am and what is something that only I have the ability to really produce, like what's uniquely me. And my grandfather, his watercolor textures, his kind of craftsmanship definitely bled into that. But if you looked at his work, you wouldn't say, oh, you are, taking his work, but it was pulled, somewhat from there. Um, this work really came when I was flipping through old sketchbooks from, some road trips that I had done. Went to a jazz club in Chicago, and there was a couple of sketches that I did there that were really expressive and super fluid, and really it was almost like trying to animate the bass player and you know on a single image. And I was like, what would it look like if I tried to bring that into a digital realm? And within like maybe 10 minutes, I had made a piece that was like, oh, that felt really good. And then I did two more in like another 10 minutes. I was like, whoa, this feels really good. And the immediacy to it felt really good because prior to that, I was trying to break into like the video game industry for a second. So I was doing like this fantasy concept artwork, which I love those kind of games and things like that, like World of Warcraft or whatever. So I was like, and I was living close to Blizzard Entertainment at the time. So I was like, maybe I could get a job there. And this was couldn't be further stylistically from that.
Yeah.
And it felt like a breath of fresh air to be like, whoa, okay. Like the immediacy to it, the
Mm,
expressiveness to it, and the minimalist nature. All of that
yeah.
really, really connected with me. And then also I'm actually colorblind. And so me trying to paint realistic things is kind of
Mhm.
foolish. Like it's not like I'm not the person to do that. And so making characters that are wildly not, you know, realistic kind of felt like a natural. It was like, oh, this is what I was supposed to do between jazz, between pop's textures and his watercolor influences and my expressiveness and, lack of ability to see color realistically. It's led me to be able to, make something that I think is like very much so me. And that yeah, I think the second that I stopped trying to make something to fit into someone else's pocket is when it actually started to work and when my career really took off. So I've tried to follow those gut instincts as much as I can because that's all we got at the end of the day.
Mm. Yeah, it's really brave. You kind of took a time off to figure out what you want. You don't see that a lot.
Yeah.
Usually,
Was pretty young too. I was like 23, 24, and that job in that at the corporate job really gave me that time. Because,
yeah,
and I did take on client work. I did like a couple of music videos with some friends that paid pretty well, but like it was not a financially successful year by any means. But at least it gave me that time.
yeah, yeah. A colorblind animator leading the future of animation industry.
I think there's the lesson to be learned there, right?
Yeah. All right, Robbie. Tell people how they can find you and what advice would you have for young animators who would wanna venture into NFT space for the end.
Yeah, you can find me online pretty much Shilstone Arts everywhere. Shilstone underscore arts. It's my last name. And uh yeah, as far as, being a new animator or venturing into this crazy world of Web3, I would strongly suggest trying to find people that you are admire and just reach out to them. I think people are very much so like eager to connect with people who are excited about
Yeah.
what they're doing. Um, and I think a lot of people are willing to give a helping hand if it's, sincere and, they're just trying to learn. There's a lot of people who are going to promise a lot of things in the space. It's a highly I don't know, exaggerated space in a lot of ways. Um, but they're really, really thoughtful, intelligent, creative people here that I think are carving out, I like to think the future of where things are going. So once you find them, stick close to them and, build those connections because that's like any industry. It's about not only about who you know, but it's, it definitely helps getting where you need to go. So, and make great work. Like the, the the speculative nature, that's a very moment to moment thing. But uh, as long as you're making timeless work, like that's kind of the name of the game. I don't know who gets to decide what timeless work is. Only time gets to tell. But I think that's my North Star through the thick and thins of this. And yeah, I find a lot of joy in that. So that would be my advice.
Yeah, that's a good advice. Yeah, I would agree with you that reaching out to people in this NFT space is smart. I was surprised actually how approachable both you and Nick were, because as soon as you see a CEO or someone with a big following, you immediately think, oh, there's no way they're gonna reply to my message, or, but that's not true. I mean, even it's such a young space and such a green space. You're right, people are eager to share what works and
Yeah.
what doesn't. So I
Yeah.
think that's pretty smart. Thank
Yeah.
you so
And I
much.
think, yeah, people want, I think people just want to share their work, and let people know, particularly in the space, that there are really talented people here building cool things. And sometimes we have to fight whatever stigma there is that exists, and being vocal about good things is just as important as anything else. So, yeah, that's my final note.
Yeah, I really think your work is incredible and your story is incredible. What you're doing with your project. I think you're trailblazing the path for new animators and small indie studios. And yeah, I think like a couple of those small creators who are doing really something incredible in the space are changing the industry. So yeah, I can't wait to see how it turns out. And I'm gonna get
Yep.
that pigeon. I'm
I was
gonna
gonna say, for those listening, grab a rat or a pigeon while you can. They're available and free, and everyone's welcome here. Everyone's part of the public, as I like to say.
yeah. Thank you so much, Robbie, for coming, and
Yeah,
I'll see you soon. Bye.
absolutely. Thanks for having me.